Did you know that the Cubans that have taken to the streets in protest, risking their lives, are protesting not getting vaccines? Neither did I. I totally thought it was something different. I thought it was maybe about freedom. But according to our administration, it's about that, kind of, but it's mostly about vaccines. So if you haven't picked up yet, today I'm going to talk about Cuba. But I'm not going to just talk about what is happening in Cuba. I'm also going to touch on the general narrative around what is happening in Cuba. And I'm also going to give you maybe a little take that I haven't heard yet. And it was just a thought that occurred to me today. But before we get into this video, if you are new here, I would suggest that you maybe subscribe, ring that bell, just to make sure that you get notifications. And if you're wondering, how is it that we pronounce this name? It's Mercedes. So let's get into the video. Earlier in the week, Cubans took to the streets to protest what exactly? The administration would have you think that the main thing that they're protesting is a concern about not having enough medical care, specifically in regards to COVID or the vaccines. What they are protesting is a call for freedom and against the authoritarian regime of communism, perhaps. The fact that they're not able to prosper in their own country and that everything has been centralized and food is limited, healthcare is limited, pretty much everything is limited. But let me not go rambling into that. I'll give you a little bit more of my take on that later. I want to kind of give an example how the administration is not wanting to outwardly admit that what the Cubans are protesting is communism. Peter Doocy, who is a White House correspondent, or who is the White House correspondent for Fox News, was asking not Psaki, I always say Psaki, I know the P is silent, Psaki, whether or not the Cubans were protesting communism. So let's go ahead and let's listen real quick to the exchange between Psaki and Doocy, and let's listen to her response and kind of see how she wiggles her way around specifically acknowledging communism.
You guys.
Why are people leaving Cuba, or what is the process for them getting here? I can explain either of them, but you tell me.
Sure, yeah. Do you think that people are leaving Cuba because they don't like communism?
I think we've been pretty clear that we think people are leaving Cuba, or not leaving Cuba, or protesting in the streets as well, because they are opposed to the oppression, to the mismanagement of the government in the country. And we certainly support their right to protest. We support their efforts to speak out against their treatment in Cuba. I will say separately, an important question is also.
So she goes on to talk about how it is that the Cubans should seek asylum and enter the country. And she's referencing the statement that was put out by Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in response to Cubans possibly leaving the island to come to the United States to seek asylum from, I don't know, a tyrannical dictatorial regime where they, get arrested and shot at and, I don't know, just any other kind of atrocity, tortured probably. He tells them to not come to the country. And it's a little ironic when you really think about it, because a lot of the claims typically made by Democrats when people are trying to cross from the southern border is that they are, humans aren't illegal and open borders. However, most of the time they are coming to the United States for economic reasons, as opposed to what is happening in Cuba is that the government is literally trying to kill them or wanting to kill them or oppressing them. Hi, jumping in real quick because there has been a new development on Thursday, which when this video comes out is yesterday, which was when I was recording. I don't know. It's like Back to the Future or whatever. States here that Psaki acknowledged Thursday that, quote, communism is a failed ideology and that the, quote, authoritarian communist regime has repressed its people and has failed the people of Cuba, after being pushed again by Peter Doocy. Also, Biden, during his meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, which I'm probably Merkel. Okay. He also said that communism is a failed system, universally failed system, and I don't see socialism as a very useful substitute. but that's another story. So you kind of sidestep that. Anyways, I just wanted to put out there that after almost, let's see, it started on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, eventually on Thursday, after being pressed multiple times, they did finally say that communism is a failed state. Now, Psaki did go ahead and in her statement, we can see it down here, she talks about how communism is a failed state, that it failed the people of Cuba. And then she says, hence, we're seeing that in the streets. But I would note that the ideology of the government, which has failed, has led to a lack of access to economic opportunity, medical supplies, to COVID vaccines. So all of those pieces are true. So she's kind of saying that I didn't say that in the beginning, but what I said was true. So I just wanted to insert that here so we have all of the information. Let's keep going because I think my tacos are here. Also, a common claim that is being made from the left, and I'm not even talking about small groups of people that are just kind of nuts and off in the far corners. I am talking about people who are in office, specifically the Squad and even a U.S. Senator by the last name of Sanders. They are members of the DSA. If you're not familiar with what the DSA is, it's Democrat Socialist of America. And again, whenever someone is trying to tell you that, oh, I'm not a socialist, I'm a democratic socialist. The idea there is that it's about people vote for socialism, therefore I am a democratic socialist. And on that note, one of the things I want to point out is the recent statement that was put out by BLM. Now, I want to share it with you and put it up on the screen here for the sake of transparency. I want to make sure that I quote it correctly and that we all get the same information. Also, I don't understand why it says COVID down here. Does it? Oh, there's the word vaccines, of course. Okay. So Black Lives Matter condemns the U.S. federal government's inhumane treatment of Cubans and urges it to ultimately lift the economic embargo. This cruel and inhumane policy, instituted with the explicit intention of destabilizing the country and undermining Cubans' rights to choose their own government, is at the heart of Cuba's current crisis. Since 1962, the United States has forced pain and suffering on the people of Cuba by cutting off food, medicine, and supplies, costing the tiny island nation an estimated $130 billion. Without that money, it is harder for Cuba to acquire medical equipment needed to develop its own COVID-19 vaccines and equipment for food production. This comes in spite of the country's strong medical care and history of lending doctors and nurses to disaster areas around the world. It goes on essentially defending communism, or not specifically outwardly defending communism, but defending the system that is in place in Cuba, and then accusing the United States of the situation that Cuba is currently in, specifically the embargo. Then it goes ahead and says Cuba has historically demonstrated solidarity with oppressed peoples of African descent, from protecting Black revolutionaries and supporting Black liberation struggles. And it goes on to name several countries, and essentially it calls for President Biden to lift the embargo, something Barack Obama called for in 2016. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the embargo real quick. The embargo does allow for humanitarian aid that includes medicine and food to enter the island. It also sent $123 million worth of chicken to the island, and also goods, at least $176 million worth of goods in the first 6 months of 2021 sent to Cuba. So this claim that the embargo doesn't allow for any kind of aid or goods to enter the island is not true. And it's not only specific, like this embargo isn't like the entire world. They can trade, they can have aid, they can have goods come in from other countries. However, I just want to go back and reference a content creator by the name of Marisa Daniela, and she is a Cuban national that is now here in the United States. She has family that's still there. She's very much connected, and she shares a lot about what is going on in Cuba. Now, I'm going to go ahead and play for you Marisa's video where she specifically cites the report from the Cuban government and how they allocate their funds.
Now, before you go on and blaming the embargo that there's not enough doctors or medicine to treat patients,
I got you covered. These are stats published by the Cuban government. This shows where the Cuban government has spent its money, its revenue, on different sectors of society. The first one is pointing to 26.7% of foreign investments, aka hotel expenditures. The second is salud pública, healthcare. Now, you my little communist defenders, look at what happens during the sector from 2015 to 2018. 26.7%, 27, 31, 36, 37%. They upped more revenue to go to the construction of hotels, while simultaneously lowering 3.2, 3.6, 2%, 1.6 of the revenue to public health. And I'm not the only one saying it. Pedro Monreal is a very well-known Cuban economist. And I know you can't read Spanish. I got you. I can translate. He says here between January and March of this year, the Cuban government spent 50% of its revenue on the construction of hotels and 3% on hospitals in 2021 during the pandemic. So while Cubans are dying in hospital beds, foreigners get to enjoy all-inclusive, unlimited food hotels.
She did that screenshot and it was a little small. It was hard to see. I went ahead and searched for the report and I'm going to share it with you. So this report here is titled The Structure and Execution of Investments of Economic Activity. From 2015 to 2019, they are reporting the percentage of investment in these different areas. So we have agriculture, mine exploration, sugar, everything's in here, construction. First of all, it's clear that what is happening here is that they're spending more money on real estate and construction than they are on healthcare for the people of Cuba. Socialism, right? But I just want to point out, like, why does it start to go up? Why in 2015? Now, this is just my opinion. This is not correlation, is not necessarily causation, but what was happening in 2014, in 2016, like in that window? That was during the Obama administration, where Obama was specifically pushing to open up and release the embargo on Cuba, right? And if we remember, he even went to a baseball game and hung out with the Castros and watched a baseball game. So what happens? They start to get this promotion from the United States to open it up. And remember, everybody was sharing all these social media pictures about how awesome it is and how quaint and cute Cuba is. But what happens when a centralized government starts to get money? When you put the power in the hands of a small group of people, they start to get money. They start to open up the hotel. What do? They build hotels because the ownership of these hotels is not owned by individuals on the island. The hotel is owned by at least 50% of a hotel is owned by the government. The rest of it, you're like, oh, well, then it must be the people. No, it's outside entities, outside countries that own these hotels. So this money is not going into the pockets of a Cuban hotel owner. It's going predominantly into the government. And even everything that is tied into the tourist industry, the main provider of income to the island of Cuba, you have to get a permit. You have to be allowed to open a small restaurant or anything that would contribute to the tourism industry. And then also those prices are controlled and a large portion of that income has to go to the government. So needless to say, it is not about COVID or the vaccines. I mean, you can probably make an argument that it has been exasperated by the fact that there is not enough healthcare there to take care of the people of Cuba during the pandemic. However, I think we can show that it was well before the pandemic that the Cuban government has redistributed their funds to prioritize construction in hotels over healthcare for the people and food. Again, why would they do this? Because when you centralize the government and you put power in the hands of few, they're going to pursue what benefits them the most. This idea that we can accomplish this utopia through socialism is a false idea. Not everyone is the same. People are individuals. They will make choices that benefit them. That is just the nature of being a human. And what we need is a system that allows for individualism and not something that is going to try and keep us all the same and at the same level, because the only way to accomplish that is through authoritarian rule. There's really no other way. You have to stifle individualism in order to create anything that is close to a utopia and use a socialist or communist system. There is not a single occasion where socialism or communism has ever worked out for the people, even though it's allegedly a system for the people. The fact that there isn't a single successful government that has used these ideals, I think, is evident of that. At their core, the people of Cuba, what they want is freedom. And here's the thing, this isn't protesting like here in the United States. They're not allowed to protest. They're not allowed to have firearms. They're not allowed to defend themselves. They know that when they go out into those streets and protest, it is a fact that the government will come and assault them, violate their right. I'm not even going to say violate their rights, because in Cuba, they have no rights. That's the thing. That is the issue. And they do it in some really skeevy ways. They'll dress up as civilians and they'll infiltrate the protests, and then they'll just start taking people and plucking them off the street to some prison to be tortured. So it is very important that we label this what it is. This is people protesting and asking for their liberty, for their freedom from an authoritarian communist government. Now, I'm going to kind of take a hard left turn, possibly, in regards to tying this to something that I see a little concerning. And it's just a little bit of food for thought before I wrap up this video. And I might be accused of wearing a tinfoil hat. Who knows? I'm okay with that. This is a thought that I have, and I don't necessarily think that it is coincidence that this is happening. And the fact that we have heard literally nothing from our government officials that tend to lean, I'm not even going to say tend to lean, they lean left because they are members of the DSA. I'm specifically talking about the squad, and I'm talking about Senator Sanders. It is not coincidence that they don't want to talk about this. And it's also not coincidence that they are pushing so hard federalizing voting. There's currently a huge debate and discussion about security in regards to voting. Just recently, several Democrats hightailed out of Texas because they didn't want to have to vote on a voting rights bill. And just a few days ago, our own president did a incredibly divisive speech in the guise of protecting the vote. So the claim is that these bills, the goal of these bills is to suppress voters, specifically minority voters. However, there is nothing in these bills that actively suppresses the vote for minorities. And because these states are acting crazy and wanting to suppress voting, we need to centralize and federalize voting, which is what H.R. 1 is. I'm not going to go into the details about these laws specifically. There's plenty of information out there and you can look for it yourself, because that's not really what my point is here. My point, and how I'm tying it to the situation in Cuba, is centralizing voting. One of the great things about our system here in the United States is that by putting the power in the hands of the states to determine how voting is done, it can be catered to the needs of the citizens of that state. And also it makes it much more difficult to hijack the election. And H.R. 1 allows many provisions that I believe diminish voter security. All of that aside, if anything, we have seen what happens when you centralize government. And the fact that Democrats, and especially the most left of the Democrat Party, is so pro centralizing our voting system should be really disconcerting. And if we have learned anything from these countries that have used a centralized government and have used socialism, it is that never ends well. And the fastest way that you could potentially end there is by diminishing voter security and centralizing our elections. Like, this is a really bad idea. People are individuals. We don't agree on everything. We don't see everything the same way. And our needs are all different. And this is why centralizing government is a bad idea. Especially when you put the power in the hands of few, there is a high probability that it will corrupt them. And I don't think it's a coincidence, the hesitation from Democrats to label this what it is, and it is a protest against communism. Now, I can hear people saying that I'm jumping the shark or that I'm being paranoid or whatever, especially if you don't agree with my views. But if you really think about it, it's pretty undeniable that when you take control of something that is so important and so vital as our voting rights, that we're putting ourselves at risk. And if there is any way to snowball into an undesirable government system, the best way to do that is by centralizing our voting rights. That is all I have to say on the subject. I just ask everybody to call what is happening in Cuba what it is. It is the people crying out for their freedom, for their liberty against a communist government system. Because the only way that you can be successful as a communist or a socialist is through authoritarianism. So that's all I have to say today. If you like this content, I would suggest that you subscribe, ring that bell, make sure you get your notifications when I update a new video. Also, if you have something to contribute, leave a comment down below. If you want to tell me how wrong I am, go ahead. Also leave a comment below. Give it a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm. And you can find me on almost every social media platform as It's Mercedes. Any references that I made in this video, there will be links down below. And I will also be linking to social media accounts that are covering what is happening in Cuba. I would highly recommend that you check them out. Give them a follow if you want to stay up to date with what is happening in Cuba. I'll see you guys next week or eventually when I make another video.